Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Welcome to Manchester. It's almost here, less than 36 hours to go. On Thursday, it's the general election. Your chance to decide on who's running the country. And tonight, before you vote, we are here with about 80, 18 to 25-year-olds to hear what's on your mind. Tonight, it's all about you.
Hi there, I'm Giles, and one of my friends was taken in the Manchester attack. My question to the candidates is if they find it morally just to use terror attack victims for their own political ends.
Hi, I'm Tash from London. My biggest concern is the NHS. How will the government continue to fund it? And how will wait times for appointments and surgery be reduced for those desperately in need? OK, plenty more from these guys tonight. We are also joined by senior politicians from 7 parties who will be listening and responding to what everyone's got to say. They are Nadeem Zahawi for the Conservatives, representing Labour, Sarah Champion. Kate Forbes is here for the Scottish National Party. David Curtin is from UKIP, Brian Paddock is from the Liberal Democrats, Flair Ellin for Plaid Cymru joins us, and for the Green Party, their co-leader Jonathan Bartley. Also, give them applause. Also, Newsbeat's Jonathan Blake is working with BBC Reality Check tonight, looking at some of the numbers and some of the promises we will hear about tonight, working out what really stacks up. And Nick Rotherham is up there going through the comments we've been getting all day at #BBC Debate. First tonight, after 2 devastating terror attacks in just 2 weeks, including one here in Manchester, security has become a much bigger part of the election campaign, in particular, how best to protect British people from any future attacks.
Police numbers in England and Wales have fallen by almost 20,000 since 2010. Numbers have gone down in Northern Ireland too, although in Scotland they've been more or less increasing for the last 30 years. Police budgets in England and Wales were reduced by almost a fifth between 2010 and 2015. But since then, they've been protected, and counter-terrorism funding has been rising with inflation. Since 2000, various governments have introduced 9 anti-terror laws. They include the ability to stop terrorism suspects from re-entering the UK and keeping people deemed a threat under house arrest. The current terrorism threat level is at severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. There have been 3 attacks in the UK in the last 77 days. Though the Home Office say intelligence services have prevented another 5 since the attack on Westminster in March.
OK, let's get your thoughts on the best way to protect British people. Hello.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Shotton and I'm 18 from Cheshire. Across the wake of these terror attacks, I've found that the dialogue has been very much about unity between different political parties and people from all different kinds of walks of life all over the world. Why is it that the Conservative Party has been so divisive by saying enough is enough and that we're being too soft on terror?
OK, we'll put that to them. Some more of your comments?
Hi, I'm Jessica and I'm from, I live in Liverpool, but I'm from Flint. And I want to know what we're going to do to stop terrorist attacks happening in the first place, instead of worrying about how many police you've got on the streets to deal with it when it's happening. I understand the Conservatives want to introduce new terror offences. What else is going to be done? Because we always hear that, oh, they're on the watch list, either in this country or elsewhere. So what are we going to do to tackle extremism in the first place?
OK.
Thank you.
Hello.
I'm Tom, I'm 22. I actually live across from Manchester Arena and didn't get much sleep on the night of the attack. And for me, my biggest problem is that I went to the One Love Manchester concert as well, and at a time when, you know, Manchester and the UK is coming together, it seems like Westminster's just intent on tearing itself apart. So what tonight are we going to see from you guys in terms of real solution instead of playing the blame game?
OK, Nadeem Zahawi from the Conservatives. What's Tom going to see tonight from you?
I'm going to try and sort of cover all 3 comments. I came to this country in 1978. I was about 11 years old. I couldn't speak English. My parents had to flee Iraq from a dictator, actually not too dissimilar to Abdi's parents. The difference is my parents embraced the country that rescued them, and we integrated. I learnt English within 6 months. I went to university, I've built a great business. I'm now the member, well, I used to be, I'm the candidate now. I was the Member of Parliament for Stratford-on-Avon, the heart of England. This country is a great country. It has incredible values, the values of freedom, opportunity, democracy, rule of law, tolerance. I think one of the things that we have not done well is integration, but also we've for too long tolerated people who preached extremism and hatred amongst us, people who preached intolerance to our values, to our way of life, misogyny, all sorts of things. And I think we've got to call those people out in our communities. And I think the Muslim community, the mainstream Muslim community, is equally targeted by these extremists, by these criminals, because they target Ahmadiyya Muslims or other Muslims as well as being kuffar, which is people who are outside the religion, therefore easy game in many ways. But what we've got to do is come together as political parties, as a community, and call out intolerance and say that's wrong, that's not, our society is not like that, we're proud of what we are. What Manchester did at the concert was incredible, truly incredible, and that should be our role model in many ways of how we deal with this as political parties. I'd like us to come together. Let's not keep tearing chunks out of one another. Let's say, look, how can we work together to get the right legislation through Parliament so that we can do this? But it's not just legislation, it's also how do we come together and call out these extremists?
Tom, can you maybe give Nadeem some more detail about the types of things, the conversation that politicians are having that you don't like, that switches you off?
Well, for me, it's just the aggressive nature of how politics has become, especially seeing Prime Minister's questions, seeing you guys at debates. I watched the leaders' debate on TV last week, and it was just a complete noise and a faff. And what I see now is that translates into social media. And for us as young people, we use social media all the time. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And the moment that someone puts a political point of view on Facebook or Twitter, we get the same kind of aggressive comments that you guys seem to be throwing back at each other, especially Labour and the Conservatives. And one thing that we have seen recently is Labour pointing the finger at Theresa May and saying, this is your fault, these people died because of you as Home Secretary. That's just not right to blame one single person.
And look, I agree with you, it isn't right, and I think we should try and just pull back from that. The one thing I would say to you is the bit that you see on Wednesday afternoon, which is the sort of the Prime Minister's question time, is not what we do. So if you look at the committee stage of any bill, or the Foreign Affairs Committee, which I sat on, where we got a fantastic report into the intervention in Libya, which has been cited, in fact, on many news programmes during the election campaign as being a really good report. And that was cross-party. We worked together in those committees, and that work is the real work of Parliament. And I hope that young people get to see some of that. Sadly, it's sort of, most of it takes place in the background rather than, as you say, the sort of the yah-boo bit of politics.
Sarah Champion from Labour.
Thank you. First of all, I have to defend my party. We very, very deliberately throughout this campaign have not done the smearing, we've not done the name calling. And so what you're saying about Theresa May, what we're doing is we're looking at her record over the last 7 years, 6 of which she was the Home Secretary, so in charge of police, in charge of our security. And I think it's acceptable to look at policies and look at decisions that politicians make, but I completely agree, it's totally unacceptable to name call. To go back to the bigger picture, I would say in the last 5 years, it's become much more acceptable to use really despicable language, which I would actually say is getting very close to hate crimes on social media. Politicians are using it, posters that we're seeing. I have to say the Brexit campaign was a particularly vile example of that. I'm glad that it feels in this election that that's calmed a little bit, but we need to have zero tolerance to that sort of thing. To look at the big picture, it's not just about a knee-jerk reaction of bringing in more police, bringing in more legislation. What we need to be doing is, from the youngest age, is teaching people about respect, about tolerance, and embedding that in, and then bringing back things like the youth service. You know, the youth service has been decimated in the last 7 years. That's the place where young people can be, just sort of channeled a little bit if they're saying things which are too upsetting, controversial, radical. that system isn't there now. So we're seeing that the schools are under-resourced, we're seeing the youth service has disappeared, we're seeing the police, the community police aren't there. So all of those levels, which would have been like our canaries, when things were starting to go wrong, we could have gone, oops, hang on, we've got an issue here, let's put some support around that person. With all that gone, it becomes an inevitability that it's only when someone does something so utterly despicable, and I'm really sorry for the people that are directly impacted on what's happened in these last 3, actually, atrocities. We shouldn't just be waiting until that moment. We should be doing something decades before.
Okay, let's get some more of your thoughts. Who else wants to make a comment?
Hi, I'm Claire from Manchester, and I have a question for everybody. So obviously after the recent horrible attacks, I have seen a lot more armed police around. Is that something that you guys would look at kind of installing permanently, or what's everybody's specific view on that?
Okay, Brian Paddock, you have experience as a retired police officer. What would you do? You want to put more money, we know, into local police, but would that be armed police?
No, I mean, there are 2 issues here, and it's not about, you've got to have the police there to respond, as you said, when an incident like this happens. And luckily in London, there was a great number of armed response vehicles, they're called, who were able to respond really quickly to deal with the incident. I'm a bit concerned that in other parts of the country, there might not be enough armed officers, because there's like 1,000 less than there were 10 years ago, 1,000 less armed officers than there were 10 years ago. So that's one aspect of it. But the most important aspect, as far as we're concerned, is this erosion of community policing. Because, you know, as well as the 20,000 police officers that we've lost since 2010, we've also lost 24,000 support officers, and that's, you know, the police community support officers are a big part of those community teams. And what that means is that some communities begin to lose trust and confidence in the police because they don't have a local officer that they can relate to. And when that happens, it means that you don't get the intelligence. I don't know whether people saw the reports the day after the London Bridge attack. One of the neighbours of one of the guys involved said, "Oh, I remember now, earlier on the Saturday, he was being over-friendly, and then he started talking to me about hiring a van." Of course, it now all makes sense. Well, maybe if he'd had his suspicions about that guy, there'd been local community officers that he could have talked to. Maybe he might have talked to them about his feelings. We know that that guy was already on the radar of the security services, so maybe the security services might have put 2 and 2 together. So we don't think, we don't think we need more powers. We don't think we need more draconian powers. There's lots of powers that the police and the security services have that they're not using at the moment. But we need to make sure that they use them effectively.
Okay, lady here in the front row. Hello.
Yes, my name's Mario. I'm 21. I'm from Manchester. Just going off of what you were saying and what you were just saying just now, due to the colour of my skin, in the wake of the awful terror attacks that have just happened in Manchester, I am genuinely afraid to go out into the city. My city has been my home for countless years.
Why?
Well, I just, you know, mostly afraid of just hate attacks, not even, you know, terrorist attacks, just from people not knowing, maybe even young people, not just online, but actually being in public, I take the tram to uni, I'm afraid to take the tram now, just afraid that someone might say something to you and you don't want to engage in conflict or confrontation. What are the different political parties, what are they doing about this now?
Some of it has got to be about understanding what is going on here. These people who are carrying out these terrorist attacks, they believe in a violent political ideology that wants to overthrow democracy, that wants to overthrow our liberal values. That is completely different from the Muslim religion. Muslim religion isn't about overthrowing democracy. Muslim religion is, you know, is about worshipping Allah and living a good life and so forth. And so part of it, you know, we've had instances in the past where people following an Islamist attack, you know, this violent political ideology, people have started attacking Sikh Gurdwaras because they don't even know the difference between Muslims and Sikhs. So you know, we've got to clamp down on all sorts of hate crime.
Let me bring in David Curtin from UKIP. How do you respond to this lady here
actually, Brian,
and her fears about hate crime?
I'm glad you did mention the word Islamist and Islamism, because this is the root of the problem, and we have to be honest about that. And this is an ideology, it's an idea, and there are some writings, Islamic writings, that are problematic. We have to admit that. There are some writings that appear to advocate violence. And Nadim, you mentioned the Ahmadiyya Muslims earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned them because they are a very peaceful group of Muslims, and they practice Islam in a very peaceful way. But we do have Wahhabis, Salafists, and other groups that what I would call Islamists, who would take all of these writings which are problematic and say that they have to be applied literally in all times and all places. Not just 7th century Arabia, but 21st century Britain and France and Germany and Russia and everywhere else there have been Islamist terrorist attacks. And we need to deal with the problem. And we do need to put police back on the street. As Brian said, I would agree, we need 20,000 more police to do community policing because that's a big hole that's been left after the 20,000 police that have been cut. But we do need to deal with Saudi, Qatari funding of Wahhabi and Salafist Islamist mosques.
And also just deal with
this
lady here who lives here and wants to know what she should do because she fears going out because of the colour of her skin and how she's treated.
Well, absolutely. I mean, would say to anybody watching, you know, it's an ideology, it's an idea. It's nothing to do with the colour of your skin, and everyone needs to realise that. You have Hindus and Sikhs as well, same colour skin, but completely different religion, different ideology. But we need to deal with Islamism, and we've got to be honest about that.
David, can you understand, though, that when a mainstream party like UKIP is putting out its so-called integration policy, which says that...
We need to integrate.
Sorry, can I speak? Which says that Muslim women shouldn't be able to wear headscarves, that if
No, we didn't say that. Burqas and niqabs. Get it right.
Okay. It also says that children, basically non-white children, when they come back to school, should be checked to see if they've had genital mutilation.
Well, we need to stop
which
FGM.
creates segregation.
We've got to stop FGM.
By humiliating and separating children, do you think that that is an acceptable way forward?
Diane Abbott put that forward in 2014. So, you know,
David, I could possibly speak. Can you see that a mainstream party saying that is actually exacerbating and normalising hate crime, which is why young people feel terrified?
Everyone should be able to be free to criticise an ideology, to talk about writings in the Quran and the Hadith, to talk about Sharia law. We need to talk about these things. And we need to talk about the ideas there and how they affect people and how they encourage Islamism, which has led to violent mass murders.
Okay.
We need to talk about that. We need to be honest about it.
Would you like to reply?
Well, sorry, just from what you're saying, I feel like you may not have actually answered what I said personally, going into the depths of the different categories of Islam. I mean, you obviously are aware of them. I was just talking about, in general, my safety, my well-being, not talking about my religion or the different categories, just in general, how can we stop other individuals attacking other individuals in the wake of something like this? I mean, there's been a lot of unity, and I've seen that, but I feel like there's also been a sort of permission for people to start attacking others, whereas I didn't see it before, but my Facebook is now full of people and now just attacking each other, and that's just on social media. I'm not talking about being out in the public and just people just yelling at you. I don't want to go out because my parents were afraid that I'm going to have to hear something that I wouldn't have had to, had someone controlled that.
The best way to deal with that is to make sure that we don't have another terrorist attack. And that means we need to deal with what causes these things to happen.
Could I come in here? Just because, Laura, I think it feels to me like over the last 20 years in this country, we've had a lot of politicians pandering to rhetoric around migration. And we've allowed the debate to go way too far in one direction. And when I think we reached a low point in the referendum, and I'd like David to address this, if possible, when Nigel Farage stood in front of that breaking point poster with pictures of Syrian refugees, which had a remarkable similarity to Nazi propaganda. Yeah. I think that was abominable, and I would like David to condemn that, because we need to call that out when it happens.
Yeah, well, this is a poster, you know, it's about immigration. It's a real picture. It was in The Guardian in October 2015, I believe. People have real concerns about the level of immigration that we've had over the last 20 years.
Do you not think that that gives permission?
If I can answer, I will finish if you let me. You did ask me a question. We need to address the rapid mass immigration that we've had over the years of Blair, Brown, Cameron and May, which is far, far higher than it was before. People are concerned about the effects on integration in our country. People are also concerned about the effects it's having on housing and on our public services, on our hospitals being overstretched, schools being overstretched.
So there's a big political question here.
But people do want it to be brought back into balance.
Okay, so the blaming of migrants is a cover-up.
I'm not blaming migrants at all. Please get it right.
The blaming of migrants is a cover-up for policy failure.
Well,
we've had successive governments that have not invested.
I'm not blaming migrants.
Have not invested in the NHS, have not invested in our public services, have given us the lie of austerity, and in return, they said actually it's the migrants that are to blame for our housing crisis. It's the migrants to blame for the pressure on social services. That is a lie, and we need to call that out as much as we need to call out the racism.
Well, you said.
Okay. Many people are worried because we have had 3 attacks in 3 months. If we can hear from Giles, who lost a friend in the Manchester attack, who do you trust to keep you safe, and what do you feel needs to be done?
I think that there's a common thread throughout this that most politicians here are missing, and that we're not looking at a religious issue here as such, but we're looking at a criminal one. Exactly. And I think that we need to look at methods going forward, whether that be more policemen and police women in our communities, monitoring the things that are going on, but there are resources in place for people to put forward threats and issues that are going forward. I need to ask the politicians here, for young people as well, to not make this issue about extremism in the sense of it being an inherent part of Islam, but to look at it as a criminal thing as well.
What would make you feel safe going about your day-to-day business?
I suppose more police presence is something that has definitely helped here in Manchester. Seeing so many police forces out protecting us is something that visually helps. But equally, more work done amongst politicians to work together to find a common solution that isn't looking for divisive politics. That's the way forward.
Okay, Nadeem Zahawi from the Conservatives. Under Theresa May as Home Secretary, there was a 20% cut in police funding, 20,000 fewer police officers on the streets, fewer armed officers compared to last year. So how can people trust you to keep them safe? Giles.
So as you saw on the programme, on the clip earlier, so the 2015 police budget was protected. But
that came after 5 years of deep cuts.
That was on the programme. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying that on counter-terrorism, the police asked for more funding, and we delivered that. On cyber, another 1.9 billion is going to cyber security. I think the lady in the front mentioned what's happening on social media and so on. And your very good point about the sort of the criminal aspect to this. What Theresa May wants to do is work with other countries to get to a place so that actually our security agencies, our security services, can work with the online platforms so that we can have a way where your information is secure and you can talk to your friends and everyone else in a secure place, but those people who are using those safe places can't use them anymore. We need to make sure there are no safe places on the internet for these people, and that's a big area that we want to focus on as well. We want to look at legislation in terms of how do you, if you know someone's about to sort of be radicalised, how do you try and bring them back away from that? How do you curtail their movements? How do you deport those who shouldn't be here in the first place? Those are the sort of things that we want to look at if we are back in government after Thursday.
Kate Forbes from the Scottish National Party.
Thank you very much. I mean, the police force is devolved in Scotland, which means it's within the competence of the Scottish Government, and we have been maintaining our police numbers over the last few years. And ultimately, cuts are a political choice. And that's why in the aftermath of the atrocities, and the hearts of everybody in Scotland is with Manchester and has been with Manchester over the last 2 weeks, there are questions to be asked about where we best deploy our resources. And we believe that law enforcement at every stage of the process needs to have the resources to do their job properly. We have legislation there, but they need resources. And in Scotland, we have made the decision over the SNP has been in government since 2007, to increase the number of police on the beat, as it were, and to make sure that we have the resources we need. So in the aftermath of the atrocities, whilst we were very grateful for the offer of the armed forces to come in and patrol our streets, we did not need to call on that resource, and we had enough capacity within the police force to do that.
Okay, Flair, Ellen from Plaid Cymru.
Plaid Cymru would like to see policing devolve to Wales so that we can better invest in our policing and to keep our communities safe in Wales. But what we also do need to do, as you were saying, is prevent extremism of all forms from happening so that we can tackle this, and investing in youth services, in community services, so that we are promoting community cohesion rather than division is crucial. And politicians have such a responsibility here when you have a public platform not to target individuals or target a specific religion, because by doing that we are increasing the division and hate within our communities and within society, and we have to be so careful. We also, I think, need to look at how we are combating extremism. So the Prevent agenda, which is currently being run by the Conservatives, many people say that they are feeling targeted. That is not going to promote community cohesion, and that is not going to help bring people who maybe are feeling isolated back into community.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Just to let you know, our audience here tonight has been selected by an independent external organisation to ensure all parties have fair representation. Now, we will hear from people around the UK as well tonight, because Nick is looking at what people have been saying on social media.
Yes, thank you, Tina. I may be up in the cheap seats, but I am armed with questions and queries from you. You guys have been using the hashtag BBC Debate all day to rant, to rage and to raise concerns. Now, I want to pick up on a point that was made on the floor about the nervousness and anxiousness on the streets at the moment. Luke has been in touch, saying having raised then lowered the threat level, London was hit by an attack. Does this mean that security is underfunded? Josh has also tweeted us. He says our security services should receive more funding to allow for better digital protection. That's something that Theresa May has been mentioning this week. Sharon says deport and detain anyone on the terrorism list. And John raises a question that a lot of people have been talking about this week. Should all our police be armed? Now, with events in London and here in Manchester, it's perhaps no surprise that security has moved up the election agenda. But you guys have been telling us that the NHS is still a massive issue for you too. Be it nursing bursaries or waiting lists, you've been sharing your stories, like Ellie, who says we should be working to maintain the phenomenal NHS service rather than trying to destroy it. Tina, I'll be interested to hear what the parties have to say about that.
Well, doctors, nurses, hospitals, mental health services is what we're going to talk about next, the future for the NHS.
We spend more on health than ever before. In fact, 30p out of every pound that the government spends on services goes on health. Yet the NHS is still struggling. Why? Well, we're getting older and we're living for longer. 13 years longer, in fact, than since the NHS was formed. And older people cost more to look after. Caring for the average 85-year-old costs 6 times as much as a 25-year-old. But there are other factors too. We're getting fatter and new drugs are getting more expensive. Then there's social care. Cuts to local services for the elderly mean more are ending up in A&E for treatment, which puts more pressure on hospitals. And although, like we said at the start, NHS spending is at record levels, year-on-year increases in that spending are at a historic low.
OK, let's get your views on the NHS and health.
Hi, my name's Amrita and I'm a pharmacy student studying at the University of Manchester. So as a pharmacy graduate, I'll be working for the NHS next year and hopefully many more years to come. I believe that the NHS is a great asset to our country and I'm very excited to be part of the workforce. However, reading about the recent pay rise cuts in the media and the increasing pressures on NHS staff, unfortunately I've had to sort of think about other ways that my future, of other things that I've had to do in the future in terms of my career, and one of them was looking at working abroad because obviously the pay is a lot better and pressure on staff is a lot less. And I know amongst other healthcare students this is a current theme that they're also thinking about doing. So my question is, how would you ensure that the NHS remains attractive for future generations to work for?
Sarah Champion, Labour.
This is genuinely the biggest problem that we have at the moment, and all of us, all of the parties here are coming out with different figures of how much we're going to invest in the NHS and in social care, and just to say that Labour has the biggest figure, but it's still a drop in the ocean.
Greensley.
What? But it's still a drop in the ocean. All the independent people are saying that what we need is more investment than we're able to financially commit. So what Labour is looking at is, as well as putting the money in, we're looking at overhauling the service. So we're looking at making sure that the staff are both recognised, respected and rewarded, not demonised as they've been in the last couple of years. We're looking at how we can integrate social care and the NHS so that both of them have parity, because to be quite honest, if you go into hospital for an operation and you can't get home again because there's no one in the community nursing to take care of you, or there's no health worker to come and take care of you, you then get stuck in hospital, which is the worst place for you, and then bed blocking begins. We're looking at very actively, I mean, Labour created the NHS, we're still incredibly proud of it. We're looking at making sure that we get back down to the 18 weeks to have your appointment, to have your operation. We're looking at getting back to 4 hours wait in A&E. And we do that by radically trying to rethink. We do that by talking to the staff. We do that by having an independent regulatory body that looks at the budgeting and that makes the right decisions for the NHS. So whether that's, well, you'll know, community pharmacy is being cut to the bone now, whether that's negotiating the best deals on the price of the drugs we get. And to be quite honest, unless we take the politics out of this and get really grown up, we're not going to have an NHS left. And the one thing that we're particularly passionate about, and I'd love to hear Nadine's views on this, is the Tories are going for something called the Naylor Report, which is looking at selling off land and assets for the NHS. We paid into this, we created this, we own this. It should be us, the population of the UK, that makes the decisions about what we do with our NHS, not just the politicians.
You're promising a large amount of money, 30 billion over 5 years. How is Labour going to pay for that?
Well, we all pay our taxes, so we have a pot of money, and we've based the projections that we've made on the figures that the government are using at the moment, and then we've made specific sort of recommendations. So one of them is the top 5% earners in this country will pay 5% more. The 95 rest of us won't. And we're also looking at getting corporation tax back to levels that it was before. So 2010, it was at 28%. The Tories last year brought it down to 17%? 19%. We're looking at putting it back up to 26%. Because, to be quite honest, we all need to be investing in our country.
Conservative Party.
That sounds all very reasonable and wonderfully reasonable, until I tell you that when we dropped corporation tax from 28% down to 19%, we actually brought £7 billion more into the exchequer. Labour obsess about tax rates. We care about tax take, what comes into the exchequer, so we can spend it on our NHS. You need a strong economy if you are going to have a strong NHS. Your leader, some political hero, is a man called Hugo Chavez. Now, if you know anything about Venezuela, that country is one of the wealthiest countries in Southern America. It floats on a lake of oil. It has the second largest oil reserve after Saudi Arabia. Today, it's bankrupt. Why? Because, like your leader, Hugo Chavez promised everything to everyone. Today, if you're sick in Venezuela, no matter what class you're from, unless you can leave the country, you're dead because there's no medicine.
I think we're talking about the NHS.
People are starving. There's nothing moral or decent about crashing an economy. What I'm saying to you is, when you tell people that you're going to raise corporation tax, you also have to tell them it doesn't raise any more money. The independent IFS looked at your figures and said, actually, you won't raise that money, so where is it going to come from? That was the question to you that was put to you. And you must be honest about these things. We, like the other parties, are saying we're going to invest in the NHS.
Where are you going to get the money from?
Well, no, we've said we've put 10 billion in. We've put an additional 2 billion into the challenge around social care. And we're committing another 8 billion by 2022 into the NHS. But you need a strong economy to be able to...
Can we just nail this once and for all?
I just want to hear from you. You've been nodding furiously. Can we get a microphone to this guy here? Tell me why you're nodding. Just here, in front of you.
I'm nodding because it makes sense, because how can you spend money you don't have? Young people are being burdened with debt, student debt, house prices are at astronomical levels compared to when they were when you guys bought houses. They're all political choices, but your Labour want to borrow even more money. So who's going to pay that back? It's going to be my generation that's going to have to start paying those debts back.
No,
why are you borrowing more money when we're going to have to be the ones paying it back?
We've been very clear.
We've been very clear. I'm sorry, no, you haven't been clear. Diane Abbott can't add her sums up. You're not clear.
Sarah Champion, respond.
Can I answer?
One sec. Sarah, and then we'll bring you in.
We've been very clear that we are not looking at borrowing money unless it's for capital investment. what we're looking at is making sure that we are completely within our means on the spending that we're doing on revenue spending. We have had that independently verified, and to be quite honest, the only figures that are in the Tory manifesto are the page numbers.
So why are you going to reduce corporation tax when it's going to bring in less money, when the IFS have said corporation tax, increasing it to your 26% is actually going to reduce the amount of tax intake?
Okay, we'll leave it there because we've got a lot of people to get through. I'm going to Brian Paddock from the Liberal Democrats.
Can I go back to the original question? It breaks my heart to hear that you're being trained in the UK, and rather than thinking about going in to support the NHS, you're thinking about looking overseas. So one thing that we're promising to do is to lift the pay cap for public sector workers, including all the people that work for the National Health Service. At the moment it's capped at 1%. We want wages to increase in line with inflation. So that's one promise we're going to make. In terms of funding the NHS, as an interim measure, in addition to the money that the Tories are promising, we're promising to put an extra £6 billion a year by putting 1 pence on everybody's on the rate of income tax, 1% extra on the rate of income tax. Now you might think, well, why should everybody pay for that? What it means is the top 50% of earners will be paying 95% of that money. It's a very progressive way of doing it. We're being honest with you. We can't just keep borrowing. This has got to be paid for. We think it's worth paying for. It's an interim measure until we get an independent body to say this is actually the amount of money each year that the NHS have. You then have a debate in Parliament, and then the Parliament either agrees with that independent body, and there'll be a separate line in your tax return that says this is the money that's going to the NHS and social care, and that is the way sustainable long-term plan that we have to fund the NHS and social care.
And some of that funding is going towards mental health. You also, as a party, want to legalise cannabis, some forms of which have been linked to mental health problems. Is that problematic?
Well, cannabis gives some people, a very, very small proportion of people who have a propensity to schizophrenia to trigger it. But it's a very, very small proportion of people. We have been the champions of mental health. Norman Lamb, when he was in the coalition, was the champion of mental health. We got the Tories to agree to parity between physical health and mental health, which meant that, and we actually introduced waiting times for mental health that never existed before. You know, and as far as this extra £6 billion is concerned, we want to earmark £1 billion of that for mental health, improvement in mental health, and £1 billion to improve GP services, because we know that by spending money on those issues, you get the best return on that investment by investing in those things.
Okay, let's hear from some more of you. Hello, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm a student from London living in Manchester. Obviously, mental health has become a lot more publicised recently. It's more spoken about, especially in our generation. I've dealt with mental health problems from a young age, and I found out that 50% of mental health disorders are established by the age of 14. Therefore, it's a really big issue in young children, and I think it needs to be addressed at a much younger age. So I was just wondering, like, what would you be doing to increase the awareness for younger children, to make it more understood at a younger age, more spoken about? And also, how would you improve the interventions, like in the NHS, to make it more available to get help at a younger age? Because I think it's not focused as much on the young children at the moment. It's kind of more like the older generation. I think it needs to have a focus on the younger children.
And that's what Theresa May is saying. So the 11.4 billion that we're putting into mental health, if you can identify early enough, is that every school will get support to identify if there are mental health issues with young children. So because if you can identify early enough and treat it, you will actually prevent it, you know, becoming a much bigger problem later on.
We're promising 10,000 new mental health staff in mental health services, but 6,700 have been cut since 2010.
Well, but we're saying in our manifesto that we'll invest another $1 billion on top of the 11.4 billion into mental health, and of course also look at the Mental Health Act to make sure the legislation is fit for purpose, as well as getting, you know, people back into work. You know, our target is 1 million people with disabilities, whether they're mental health issues or physical, back into the
Okay, Jonathan Bartley, what would the Green Party do?
We would have parity within the NHS when it comes to esteem for mental health. But can I just take up this issue around mental health more broadly, and that you raised, Sophie? In our schools, we are creating children who are effectively economic units to compete in a global marketplace. We are testing them to death. And we need a better education system where we allow our young people, our children from a very early age, not to be subject to that rigour. I took a SATs test the other day just to see what it was like, what my children were going through.
How did you do?
And I got, yeah, no, I think I got about 97%. But, very good. But the stress was huge. But I think this issue of stress and mental health is something we have to address in the round. And I'm astonished to hear you talk about the Conservative government's record on this, because when you look at social services and the employment support allowance, the work-related activity group within employment support allowance, these are people that the government accepts are too sick or disabled to work at the moment. Yet they've just put in a cut of 30% for new claimants in the work-related activity group. This is for people that the government accepts are too sick or disabled to work. We know that there are people committing suicide because of sanctions to do with benefits, primarily who are mentally ill. This is absolutely despicable, and unless we get this out in the open, unless we have this conversation about it, it's going to go on, and I cannot accept the platitudes around mental health from this government. I'm sorry.
Okay, David Curtin, UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need parity of steam with mental health and physical health and also social care as well, 3 strands of the health service. And I think that's something that we all agree on across the political spectrum. But you know, I've heard a bit of unreality here from the 2 main parties. I mean, Labour seems to have a magic money tree which doesn't exist. And they're not going to. You know, Jeremy Corbyn comes out like Santa Claus saying, I'm going to give this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. But there's no money there to do all of these things. The Conservatives, you know, they talk about, you know, having a strong economy, but they're cutting the NHS to the bone.
So how do you have the extra £9 billion a year that UKIP are promising?
Well, absolutely, £11 billion, and we know where we're going to get it from. We know we're going to get it from Brexit, from not paying our EU membership fees. That's £10 billion a year. And we're also going to cut the overseas development budget back to the useful part of it and not spend the wasteful part of it, giving money to countries with space programs and nuclear weapons, rather than spending it here at home on hospitals, on mental health care, and on investing in our doctors and nurses. And we will be able to re-give out the bursaries to nurses and midwives, and we'll be able to pay back the student fees of students doing STEM subjects, studying medicine, so that if you do study medicine, pharmacy, science and things like that, you will get your fees paid back for you if you work in the NHS for 10 years after you've graduated. So I think that's a very good deal that we will give. We're the best on the NHS.
Hello, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Aisha. I'm a student nurse in Manchester, and basically I just wanted to say, I know there is tuition fees paid for by the NHS that nurses and midwives get, but the thing is, I don't get the same amount of same amount of money in terms of loans and grants, and I'm constantly having to cut it really fine with how much I'm getting to spend with my rent, living costs, and also touching on mental health. I've suffered from mental health problems since I was a young kid, and not only is it just me who's suffering from these, because of the nature of my course and my degree, and also colleagues who I work with, it's very strenuous, and it can be something that takes a toll on you, and I have to pay for my own medication, and so do several of the other people in our generation. And I just want to know, what do you guys think about mental health with especially student midwives and nurses, because we don't have the money to support ourselves, and you're saying you will fund this money, but if we work for the NHS, what if it's that the NHS will eventually be privatised, so it's being said, but what if that happens and there is no NHS for us to work for the 10 years and then get the money back for it and have this repaid to us? How do you expect that to happen?
It won't be privatised by UKIP. We'll keep it in public hands, and we're going to be able to fund the bursaries for nurses and midwives.
That's a U-turn on what you said in your last
well, no, absolutely. It isn't actually, and we are not going to privatise it. So, and we will, as I said, we're going to give the bursaries to you, and we're going to be able
Can I go back to the original question? When we were in coalition, we earmarked £25 million a year for children's mental health services. The reality is that that money, we know now, is not getting through to the front line to delivering services. You raised the issue around bursaries for nurses and midwives, which this government has now stopped. I mean, it is a ridiculous thing to do. We will reinstate those things. Why is it ridiculous? Because we're already seeing lots of EU nurses and midwives already going back to continental Europe because they're so uncertain about the future because of Brexit. So it is a ridiculous time to do it. We would reinstate it. I mean, I've suffered from clinical depression a couple of times. You know, I know what it's like. And that is, you know, so I'm not only passionate about this, for me it's personal.
But I think at election time, a lot of people talk about supporting mental health. And again, it goes back to actually reviewing people's records. And we need to raise awareness, we need to fund it, but we need to put the money where it's most important. In Scotland, we were, under the SNP, we were one of the first governments to establish a Minister for Mental Health. And we have doubled the number of places for child psychologists, for example, going back to the point about putting the money where it's most critical from a young age and making sure there is that support. But it comes back to this idea of everything being integrated. So education, healthcare, we've also integrated health and social care. So that means that there isn't the same extent, for example, of bed blocking, because we're able to support people from the point that they come into contact with social care or with the health service, and there's that streamlined support for people so that when they ask for help, they're not left hanging for a very, 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 very long time before they get help. They're able to get help quickly.
But health is devolved, so you already have the power to give nurses a pay rise and get rid of that 1% cap, so why haven't you?
So you're right that health is devolved, but our overall budget is still set by Westminster, and if we're seeing cuts under the Conservatives in all the other areas of competences, we're also seeing cuts to the Scottish budget itself. And we made the decision that in order to protect jobs, we had to maintain this cap, but in our recent manifesto we've said that we will reconsider it and we will ensure that nurses and doctors are paid in line with inflation.
Ellen, Plaid Cymru.
Plaid Cymru want to deal with problems in the NHS, so you are right, staff are feeling pressure. That's why we want to train an extra 1,000 doctors and 5,000 nurses, half of which will work in our communities over the next 10 years for the Welsh NHS, so we want to take a long-term approach. And on mental health, Plaid Cymru actually secured an additional 20 million for mental health support in Wales by being an effective opposition. And it's not enough to just identify problems. We have to be teaching children about mental health because we all have mental health, and sometimes it will be better and sometimes it's worse, just like with our physical health. So we need to teach people about mental health so that we can identify when maybe we are starting to feel not poorly, and then of course we have to resource support for it. In Wales, some people who receive treatment because of poor funding in mental health support have to travel to England to receive this support, and that's actually really problematic because if you want to transition back home, and you want to do that slowly, 1 night at home, back in, 2 nights at home. It's very difficult to do that when you're travelling across miles and miles and hours and hours. So we want to continue investing in mental health support, continue investing in our NHS, and on making savings. We want to integrate social care into the NHS so that we have a social care and an NHS system which is working effectively together. Because firstly, without good social care, people are going to not be able to recover, and that's putting more strain on our GPs and on our hospitals, which is why it's crucial they're brought together. But also for patients' dignity and to be able to have good care, it's crucial that we have good care in the communities, and that again people can have that transition from hospital into good community care and back.
All right, we should say when we talk about health being devolved in Scotland, Wales and also Northern Ireland, we're talking about the powers for health being decided by the governments there and not by MPs in the House of Commons. Jonathan Blake, what could you tell us about the NHS? We're hearing lots of facts and figures, lots of numbers.
Yeah, and we're hearing a lot about mental health, Tina. It's very difficult to establish exactly how much money is spent on mental health in general because there is no specific mental health budget, and because of the way the NHS works, it's commissioned in lots of different ways by lots of different bodies. And it's worth saying that although the Conservatives of Labour have both promised more money for the NHS, they haven't specified how much of that will go on mental health. But what we can look at is staffing levels. And if we go back to 2010, we can see the number of specific mental health specialist nurses has fallen by around 6,500 from 45,000 or so back in 2010 to almost 39,000 last year. And in terms of psychiatric doctors, there are around 8,500 specific psychiatric specialists in England, and they've fallen by a much smaller number, around 23 between 2010 and last year. So that's an idea of the level of staffing in England only for mental health specialists.
Okay, thank you. Nick, what's happening online?
Let's stick with the NHS just for a moment, because it's something that everybody has experience of, everyone can relate to. First of all, Emily's tweeted us, "My biggest concern is the recruitment of mental health nurses after cutting the bursary." We'll return to the bursary in a second. Henry, "My mum has worked in the NHS for 25 years. I think that wage allocation and outsourcing to agencies is wrong." Al picks up on a point mentioned by the Conservatives. "We can't fund the NHS without a strong economy. But," he says, "can we have a strong economy without a healthy population?" And as I said, let's return to that issue of bursaries. Lily has been in touch. "I spend half my time at uni, then I work as a nurse. The Tories have cut loans and bursaries." Now let's sidestep for a second. You guys are often called Generation Rent, a group of people who will struggle to afford to buy their own home, and housing is another big issue. We've had Alicia get in touch. Excessive rent and a lack of affordable housing are ruining the lives of young people. And I think there's going to be some strong views in the audience on this one, Tina.
Yes, buying and renting a house is something people here are very keen to talk about too.
Home ownership has dropped to its lowest level in more than 20 years. Why? Well, for starters, the cost of buying a house in the UK has never been higher. On average, it's going to cost you £215,000. It's cheaper in the northeast and way more expensive in London. 20 years ago, the average house would have cost around 3.5 times your yearly salary. Now it's 7.5 times. If the cost of your lunch had gone up at a similar rate, a roast chicken would now cost 51 quid and a loaf of bread would set you back a £5. And even if you do have the cash, there aren't enough houses. Last year, 170,000 were built, quite a way short of what's needed. And then there's renting. 4.5 million properties in England are rented, 1 million more than at the start of the decade. And those are the reasons why home ownership has dropped to its lowest level in more than 20 years.
Okay, let's hear your thoughts on housing and renting.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I'm 24 from Manchester. I live with my girlfriend and 2 children. We're currently renting at the moment, but we'd like to buy somewhere. I'm wondering what each party is going to do in terms of helping young families like myself be able to afford to get onto the property ladder.
Okay, anyone over here? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Arif. I'm a 23-year-old university student. The average deposit in this country for a first-time buyer is £32,000. That's more than double what it was just 10 years ago in 2007. My generation are having to buy their first homes much later in life and have their mortgages longer, sometimes 35 years, compared to what your generation had. So what realistic solutions are you going to implement in order to bring a radical change to this problem?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Tarek and I'm 20 from Manchester, and I go out around Manchester quite often and I can see the amount of homelessness increasing drastically, and I've realised that a lot of the parties are offering a lot more housing, but my question is, how are you going to cap or maybe abolish foreign investors that are looking to invest and buy assets which they already have, where we have our own people on Spice? I'm sure you're all aware of Spice, the drug, and how you can just prioritise our own people rather than rich foreign investors.
Okay, lady down here. Hello, what's your name?
Hi, my name's Georgia. I'm 23. I'm from Cambridge, but I live in Leeds. Most of the political parties have pledged to tackle the housing crisis, but similar promises were made in the last election, and the Tories have failed quite spectacularly to meet the number of houses that they've promised every year. We've also heard from older voters that young people have it easier, more opportunities, but I can't sell my iPhone to buy a new house. So I'd like to know what the politicians here this evening are going to do to address the UK's housing shortage.
Okay, now both Conservative Labour governments coalition have consecutively failed to build enough houses. What are you going to do, Sarah Champion, Labour?
First of all, please don't hate me, but my first house cost £32,000, which you're saying is the average deposit. So I can't actually imagine how you look at having a home of your own. And I think that's one of the saddest things, because to have that security of something that's yours, whether that's a long-term secured rent, whether that's a council house, or whether that's somewhere you buy, I mean, that's a fundamental human thing to do. And the flip of that is seeing the homeless levels rise and knowing that's to do with government choices around pay, around accessibility, around building houses. So what Labour is looking to do is basically fundamentally build more houses. It's also about getting young people so that they have the skills to build those houses. It's then about having 1 million new houses over a 5-year period and making sure that half of those go into sort of social housing. So whether that's with housing associations or with councils, so that they're there, they're secure, and they're an asset of this country. It's also about making sure that you have landlords who are honourable, because the level of rent increases is ridiculous. So we're going to make sure that that's capped to inflation. We're also going to make sure that landlords have to provide a safe home so that all of the checks are done for you. We're going to have to try and also make sure that this just getting rid of tenants when they don't want them, or to get more people in and bigger deposits, that's got to stop. And we will bring in legislation to make sure that that stops. But again, with everything that Labour's proposing, what we're trying to do is think big, think how we can help everybody to have a secure home, and also to help the economy by putting those skills and the money back in the country. So the final thing, you were talking about foreign investors. If people want to invest in this country, fantastic. We'll take their money, but we also want to make sure that they do invest in this country, because they are using our roads, they'll be using our education, and they'll be benefiting from the economy that we want to see growing.
OK, Nadeem Zahawi, Conservatives.
Daniel, in the short term, Help to Buy has helped about 350,000 families to bridge that gap in terms of deposit, because you probably can pay the monthly instalments on the mortgage, but it's the actual capital that's needed to put down the down payment. In the longer term, I think to Arif's point, we pledged to build 1 million homes by 2020. We're running at approximately 190,000 at the moment, so I think we'll hit that target by 2020. In the manifesto, we said we'll add another 500,000 by 2022, and what we want to do is work with councils and housing associations. So we build more council housing, and if people live in those houses for 15 years, they can actually have a right to buy those, because I think that's a good thing to do, to own your home. Tarek, to your point about homelessness, there's a brilliant colleague of ours, I think we both parties support him, Bob Blackman. Shout out to Bob, he's a candidate this time around. He delivered the Homelessness Act, the bill that went through Parliament that had cross-party support, and the government supported it, and the government, the Conservative Party in their manifesto, in our manifesto, we've pledged to cut homelessness by half in the next 5 years, and I hope we can deliver that on that pledge.
What do you make of that?
No, I understand what you're saying, and I've obviously seen that initiative myself, but even still, sometimes the amount that you still have to sort of put down there, it can be quite strenuous, and we've struggled to sort of get that much funds together. So I don't think that initiative itself is...
We've got an
shared ownership. Just let me answer that quickly. Sorry, forgive me, Brian. Have you looked at shared ownership as well? Because that's another thing that you can look at, where you pay part rent and then but eventually end up sharing the ownership.
Yeah, and of course.
Housing associations in my area, Orbit, do a lot of that. They operate in other areas, but it's worth looking at as well.
OK, let's get some more of your stories. Hello.
Hi, my name's Sammy Jo. I'm from Manchester. I'm 25. Since I was 16, I've saved and I've done the right thing. I've got Help to Buy ISA. I've now got the opportunity to buy a house, and something that's concerned me is one of the party ideas from the Labour Party in terms of changing council tax, which could see an increase by it triple. I know other party leaders are agreeing with this idea. It actually frightens me, because I've now got to the point where I can afford it, but is my council tax going to be unaffordable? That I actually can't afford it now. I've got to that point. I just want clarification from you as parties that I can afford it.
Tax, the garden
yeah,
tax,
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
that's an absolute out-and-out lie, and I think the Tories are outrageous.
It's in your manifesto.
To be putting lies in there.
It's in your manifesto.
We are not having a garden tax. It is nonsense.
Okay, let's hear from the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley. What would you do to solve the housing crisis?
We feel that,
for this lot?
I think Tarek actually touched on this. We feel that actually none of the other parties are facing up to what the real issue is. Yes, there is an issue of supply, but actually when you look at the 2011 census, we actually have 140 million rooms in this country for 65 million people. We have more bedrooms per head of population than we've had at any time in our history. Now that's kind of puzzling, isn't it? So what's going on here? What we have is a broken housing market where housing has been turned into a speculative commodity. We know that buy-to-let investors and foreign investors are coming in and they're driving up prices. And when you have something like Help to Buy, actually all it is doing is helping out developers who say, thank you very much. That gives us another chance to put up our prices further. What we have to do is get rid of the subsidies. We subsidise buy-to-let investment market by £6.5 billion a year. You take that money, you put it into deposits for council housing, you can lend against that, lift the cap on local authorities, they can borrow against that, and then the housing gets built and gets paid through housing benefit or private rental. You can also put not just rent controls, like rent caps, like Labour want to do, but actually that will only cap the increases in rents, but actually rent controls, which will allow prices to be stabilised and even in some cases brought down if you give those powers to local authorities. There is so much we can do. The problem here is the political will to go and take on those investors who are pushing up the price of housing and making housing into commodities, not homes.
Okay, what do you make of what you're hearing from the politicians about housing?
I think a lot of what's being said is positive in respect to building more council houses. I think some of the reforms in the 80s could have been quite damaging to the housing market in the sense that we're giving private companies, or the onus is on private companies to build houses which are often much, much smaller, much worse quality than what were the houses that were built by local authorities, and it's often well, it's making it, in my opinion, much harder for young people to really access the property market. So I think hearing about the support for local authorities and housing associations to extend their remit and perhaps start building houses again, start being properly in charge of their towns and their town planning, I think that can only really be a good thing.
Okay, UKIP, David Curtin.
Yeah, in 1996, the average cost of a house was about 3 times the average salary. They were very, very affordable. But now it's about 8 to 10 times the cost of an average salary. The housing market has got completely out of balance. There's simply an issue of supply and demand. And we hear from all the parties we're going to build way more houses than we have at the moment. It's about 150,000 a year is the amount that's been built over the last 20 years or so. It's not going to happen this time. It hasn't happened for the last 20 years. It's not going to happen again. But the reason is that it's got so out of balance is because of a huge population increase. And that's mostly due to rapid net immigration. There's been 4 million net immigration since 1997. All those people need to be housed somewhere, and that's driven up demand without bringing the supply in, and the supply isn't going to come. What we have in UKIP is a policy of bringing immigration back into balance. It's going to take 20 years to get the housing market back into balance because it's taken 20 years to get it so out of balance. We've got to start somewhere. You know, if we don't, the population of this country is going to be 80 million by 2050. That's simply unsustainable. There simply aren't enough homes, and there never will be for 80 million by 2050. So we've got to be honest about this, and UKIP are, and we will deal with it.
Brian Paddock, Liberal Democrats.
Well, we've got to be honest and stop blaming immigration for everything. So what we are planning to do is to promise 300,000 new homes a year. If the private sector, as the Tories rely on, does not deliver that, then the government must directly commission housing where it's needed to make sure we get up to that level. In terms of people who can't afford a deposit, we've got a scheme called Rent to Buy. What it means is that you rent a property from a housing association, you pay market rent, but gradually you'll build up, just by paying the rent, you gradually build up a share in that property. So at the end of 30 years, where you're just paying the rent, you will own that property. And if you want to move, then you take whatever you've built up in terms of the deposit when you move. So you need no deposit at all. It's as if you're just renting, but you're renting at market rent. But because you're doing it from a housing association, the property will be yours in 30 years' time.
Okay, hello, what's your name?
I'm Meg, I'm 19 years old.
How do you feel about housing and renting?
From personal experience, I was homeless at the age of 17 for a whole year. And after that year, I was only phoned to ask if I wanted to stay on the housing list for homelessness. There was no communication for that whole year, no support, nothing. I want to know what's going to change.
Where do you live? What area is that in?
Mid Wales.
Okay. Plaid Cymru.
Plaid Cymru want to build 10,000 new affordable houses over the next 10 years, but we also want to make owning and running a household more affordable. So we want to create a Welsh energy company, Ynni Cymru, that will allow us to use Welsh natural resources to bring down the cost of energy for families and houses across Wales. We want to scrap the cruel and unnecessary bedroom tax, and we want to scrap letting agency fees so that it's cheaper to rent.
Scottish National Party, Kate Forbes.
Yeah, so I mean, if we make it quite simple, we need three things. Simplistically, we need more supply, but we need the right houses, and we need good jobs that pay well. We need more houses. So over the last, and again, it comes back to looking at what parties' records are, not just what they're saying now in a campaign. And over the last parliamentary term in Scotland, the SNP exceeded their target of building 30,000 affordable homes. And by affordable, I mean houses that actually reflect what people are earning, what the average earnings are in the area. And that can be a variety of different types of home. That can be social rent, council houses, shared equity schemes, but to make sure that there is that increase of supply of affordable homes. But also looking more broadly, whilst housing is devolved, there are certainly policies that are made at Westminster that have a really negative effect in Scotland. And since 2013, the Scottish Government, the SNP government, have been spending about £400 million trying to mitigate the effects of the bedroom tax. And we're also really disturbed to see the scrapping of housing benefit for 18 to 21-year-olds, because that will have a very negative effect on people in Scotland who are in need of housing support. So we're building more, we're building the right types of houses, but we need a bit of help from Westminster.
Okay, Jonathan, housing is a massive issue for young people, for this generation. You're working with BBC Reality Check tonight. What can you tell us?
Yes, and we've been digging through the manifesto, and just to clear up a bit of a disagreement we had not long ago between Labour and the Conservatives about what the Tories are calling the garden tax in Labour's manifesto. What Labour is actually proposing is to have a consultation on what to do about council tax and business rates. Business rates are what paid by small businesses, and council tax is what we pay on the houses that we own or rent. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the independent think tank, says that it makes more sense for business rates than it does for council tax, but we should bear in mind the last time council tax was reviewed was back in 1991, when everything was obviously worth much less than it is now. And calling it a garden tax could be considered controversial because council tax is based on the value of the property, including the land around it. So the tax is already, a council tax is already on the value of the land and the home.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and BBC Reality Check for clearing that up for us. Just a reminder that our audience here tonight has been selected by an independent external organisation to ensure all parties have fair representation. What's coming in on our hashtag BBC debate, Nick?
Yes, Tina, this is an issue that always riles you when we talk about it on Newsbeat, and tonight it's no different. Let's whiz through a couple. This person says so many people want to move out, but they can't afford it, and there's nowhere for them to move to. And the next one, anonymous, although I've got a sneaking suspicion it's from Sammy Joe. Can someone tell me why my council tax goes up? I can't see what's changed. Now, what we do know is that it's going to be hard to afford a house if you haven't got a job. And you guys have been telling us that the job market is tough out there at the moment. Josh has been in touch. People think we want everything handed to us. We don't, but we at least want access to it. And finally, Joe, is austerity working when the deficit hasn't reduced by that much and wages haven't gone up? Tina, should we check the party's CVs on this one?
I think we should. Thank you. Finding a job, getting paid enough and making sure your contract is fair, that's what we will be dealing with next.
The number of jobs in the UK is at a record level, the highest in fact since records began in 1971. Unemployment is also at its lowest level for more than 40 years, and youth unemployment is down too. So when you put all of that together, it sounds pretty good. But let's take a closer look. 3.5 million people working here aren't from the UK. There's also nearly 1 million people on zero-hour contracts. They don't guarantee any work whatsoever, and disproportionately affects 16 to 24-year-olds. And just because you have a job, it doesn't mean that you're rich. 1 in 8 workers are living in poverty, and there are warnings that this year's wages won't keep up with an increase in prices.
Okay, how are you getting on when it comes to jobs? Hello.
Hi, I'm Jack, I'm 22 and I'm studying for a Masters in International Disaster Management here in Manchester. The government's made a lot of the fact that unemployment figures have gone down in the last few years, and that seems great on the surface. But what you fail to mention is the fact that a lot of these jobs are insecure, no zero hours contracts, the part of the gig economy, or, which I think is worst of all, they're exploitative apprenticeships in things like customer service for Asda, or I think there's one for sandwich artistry for Subway now. Now, these don't give people the skills they need. It's a handout to corporations to give them a workforce which they can employ in minimum wage jobs for less than minimum wage and give them no skills. So how do you plan to tackle these exploitative apprenticeships?
Okay, let's hear from you down here. Hi. Hello. Yep, your time.
Colin, I'm 21, I'm from Glasgow. Funny you said that, the apprenticeship, I actually finished myself a government-funded apprenticeship. But I'm actually recently unemployed, so what I was wondering, question to all parties, maybe more specifically the SNP, but what will you do to create more jobs for people our age?
Tell me about your apprenticeship. What were you doing?
The one I done was actually digital marketing
okay.
and like IT and admin, but it was more what he was covering. It was more of a sales role where I was on the phone and speaking to customers and stuff.
How did you find it? Was it useful? What were you getting paid?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot of work skills, obviously. I learned like a lot more about being in a workforce and being responsible and stuff like that. But in terms of going from that into another job, which was initially, I was told that would be a high likability, a high probability of that being. I didn't actually come into employment after it, so I did learn a lot, but I don't think it's the way it's made out as if it's a stepping stone to getting straight into work. I don't think that's always the case.
Okay, Kate Forbes, SNP.
Yeah, well, I think if you ever wanted an example of how austerity hasn't worked for the last 7 years, employment and youth employment is a good place to start. The Conservatives like to style themselves as looking after the economy and meeting these financial targets, and yet they've singularly failed to do that. And so the economy has not grown at the extent it should have. And austerity has actually kept the economy back, which means you haven't got the same extent of job creation. But it isn't just about people in employment, it's about what they're getting paid as well. And again, we in the SNP feel very, very strongly that people should be paid a fair wage. They should be paid the real living wage, not the rebranded living wage. And the cut-off should not be age 25. Why should somebody age 26 earn something that's a different wage from somebody age 24 who might be doing exactly the same job? So we've said in our manifesto that we're committed to raising the minimum wage in line with the real living wage so that it's over £10 over the next parliamentary term. But it really does come back to ending austerity, making sure that people have money in their pockets that they can spend, so there's more money going around the economy, and that means that our economy grows, we're more productive, and it's better all round.
Okay, Nadine Zahawi, Conservatives. We heard about 0 hours contracts. More people are in work, but a lot of that work is low paid, low hours, insecure, and disproportionately affects young people when it comes to 0 hour contracts. What would you do for them? Well,
first of all, we introduced the national living wage. The Conservative Chancellor did that at £7.50. We've pledged to increase that to 60% of median wage and then continue for it to go up with inflation. I spent a year as the Prime Minister's apprenticeship advisor when David Cameron introduced the apprenticeship programme, where we're basically putting a levy, 0.5% of the wage bill of very large corporations. So any company that has a wage bill of £3 million, 0.5% of that is taken in apprenticeship levy. So that's basically going to deliver about £3 billion of investment into apprenticeships. Now, when I looked at this, you know, the Americans emailed to say, look, can we come and have a look at what you've done? Because we delivered about 2 million apprenticeships in the 5 years when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and then we set a target of 3 million for this Parliament as well. We were doing something good, yes, it could always get better, I think, and degree apprenticeships, for example, are something that really is pioneering. So a teaching assistant can become a teacher on a degree apprenticeship, a nursing assistant can become a nurse on a degree apprenticeship, and be paid as well as getting that degree apprenticeship. But when you look at countries like Germany, one of the sort of insights that I took from that is that in Germany, businesses were embedded in the education system. So every child had exposure to both the opportunity of going to university or going on an apprenticeship, and the system was pretty stable. And I'm glad that actually Labour worked with us very much on the apprenticeship levy and support the apprenticeship levy on this. On 0 hours contracts, which I think you mentioned, so the problem with 0 hours contracts when we came into office is an employer can say, right, you're on 0 hours contracts and you're exclusive to me. You can't go anywhere else. You've got to sit at home, wait by the phone until I ring you. What we did was we changed the legislation to say, no, it should be equal. If you want me to give you my time, I should be able to go to 3-4 employers.
It was Liberal Democrats in the coalition who pushed that,
fair enough.
and
fair
the
enough.
Tories
Let me just finish.
resisted it.
You have your chance to speak. Relax. So we introduced the idea of actually both ways. The employee can decide to have 3, 4, 5 different contracts with different employers, and they can choose. There was a really interesting piece of work that McDonald's did the other day, and our fact checker hopefully will support me on this. So they offered all their 0 hours contract employees to go on a permanent contract. 80% of them said, no, we don't want to go on a permanent contract. We prefer the flexibility, whether they were students or for whatever reason, they wanted that flexibility. So, you know, we have to be careful before we sort of, you know, tar a whole section of the workforce by saying, actually, you know what, these are all bad. But actually, people sometimes prefer that flexibility, especially if they're studying and want to work at certain hours, not all the time.
Brian Paddock, Liberal Democrats.
So 40% of people who do 0 hours contracts want to continue to do 0 hours contracts. But what we want to make sure is that that isn't used as a way of exploiting people. So if people are actually working regular hours, there should be a legal right for those people to move on to a fixed contract rather than 0 hours contracts. I'm afraid taking the minimum wage and just recalling it the living wage does not make it a living wage.
Has anyone here, hang on, has anyone here had a 0 hours contract? Okay, let's get some microphones to you. Hello.
Hi, my name's Rachel and I'm from Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. I am on a 0 hour contract, but my company calls it a relief contract just because it's not as scary. But I'm a youth worker for my local authority, and as Kate has previously mentioned, my budget comes from my local authority, which comes from Holyrood, which comes from Westminster. Now, if there are more cuts made to the budget, my job's on the firing line. Now, we've been extremely lucky in Highland that we've had our internal budgets cut, which, I can't believe I'm saying this, only means that the projects that I do with young people are being cut. My job is not on the line yet. My job involves working with young people and giving them the benchmark to their future. If our budgets are being cut in Westminster and that path follows me to the Highland Council, how on earth am I going to prepare the next generation of young people, the next generation of your electorate, to be skilled for the jobs of 5 years' time?
Thank you. Who else is on a 0 hours contract? Hi.
I've been on a 0 hours contract since I was about 17, and I've always really enjoyed being on it because it gives me flexibility.
What do you do?
I work in retail and do promo jobs as well. But I think the question should be more about what the minimum wage should be in terms of long-term contracts. Like, I've just finished uni and I'm looking for jobs in London, but how am I expected to get a job when some of them are paying 16,000 a year? How am I also going to pay for £800 rent per month? It should be more focused on the minimum wage rather than 0 hours contract, I think.
Okay, Sarah Champion, Labour, 0 hours contracts work for this lady. You want to ban them?
Yeah, we want to ban exploitative ones because we do not think that that is fair. We think that everybody deserves a proper living wage starting at £10 from the age of 18, because to be quite honest, prices of a loaf of bread or a bus fare are the same if you're 18 or 28. It's also taking it back a step. So we want to get apprenticeships, good quality apprenticeships, on a par with university degrees, whereas at the moment they seem to be drifting and there's a stigma associated with apprenticeships, which is nonsense because particularly businesses are crying out for well-trained people. What we'll do, which is a really big thing, is we will scrap tuition fees, because to come out of a degree with £40,000 debt is crazy. What we'll also be looking at doing is finally getting rid of the gender pay gap, because I do not understand why it helps anyone, and definitely our economy, when a woman is earning on average 18% less than a man doing the same job. We've had Labour brought in legislation around equal pay in 1970, and we're still at an 18% pay gap. What we'll also look at doing is getting a national investment fund. We'll have banks regionally, so that small businesses particularly can go to that and grow their business to bring in more employment in the area. But what we're looking for particularly is that sort of high earning jobs rather than just about doing jobs. So 3% of our GDP is actually going to go on research and development, because that's what we're seeing is the fastest way to grow our economy.
Okay, any more questions here about jobs? Hello.
Just a quick one to Sarah, sorry, following on that point. You mentioned it being crazy that students are coming out 2021, whatever it be, with 30, 40, whatever, £1,000 worth of debt. Labour in power between 97 and 2010. If it was so crazy to come up with such enormous amounts of debt, why didn't you make the change then? Why are you waiting till now?
Well, we brought in £1,000 as opposed to £9,000. I think there's a big difference between a contribution and £9,000.
You trebled it. Brian's right, you trebled it.
Okay,
there's a brilliant piece that
So just a point, in terms of your policy, mate, you wanted to go to completely free. If that was your ideology now, why has it changed 10 years ago, back in, let's say, 2007, for example? You still had £3,000 roughly, tuition fees and maintenance fees. If you're so against students having debt, why 10 years ago, or when you were last in power, why didn't you abolish it then?
Perhaps because I've only been here. How it works in Scotland.
I've only been here for 4 years. And what we're doing now is looking at what changes we need for the future. I'm good, but I can't change history, I'm afraid.
Okay, I think it's time to get a reality check. Jonathan.
I'm glad you said that, Tina. Well, just going back to your point about McDonald's asking people on zero-hours contracts if they want to transfer, they did. And as with a lot of other corporate employers, they do find, big employers, they do find that zero-hours contracts work for a lot of people. But let's remember, those are big multinational companies concerned about their corporate image and may play by the rules that other smaller employers might seek to get round. But I think it's worth highlighting really the difference that there is between the national living wage, as it's been called since April this year, we've heard a lot about, at £7.50 an hour for over 25s. If you're under 25, you can expect to earn a lot less, anything between £7.05 and down to £3.50 an hour, which if you're on an apprentice like you, apprenticeship, you're more than likely to get. So under 25s really are at a disadvantage when it comes to earning a minimum wage. And just to give you an idea of how many people are on it, KPMG, the global accounting firm, looked at this back in 2006 and found out that just over 20% of people in the UK were paid less than the voluntary living wage, which is £8.45 outside of London.
Okay, thank you. We don't have much time left, but I know a lot of you want to talk about Brexit. Hello, what's your name?
My name is Rico Smith and I'm 18 years old. 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union last year. March this year, Theresa May triggered Article 50, taking a stance of a hard Brexit. Can the woman be trusted? I want to know from the politicians who can truly deliver a Brexit that is a hard Brexit.
Nadeem Zahawi, can Theresa May be trusted with Brexit?
Yes, you can. I don't think there's a thing as a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. I think there's a good Brexit, and what Theresa May needs is a mandate.
It's all very basic, though. We keep hearing hard Brexit, soft Brexit, good deal, bad deal. It's pretty basic. What does it actually mean?
What it means is Theresa set out 12 points for the negotiations. She gave a very important speech at Lancaster House a few months ago. So controlling our borders, making sure that we have the best trade deal possible with our European partners. We remain European. We're just coming out of the EU institutions.
Okay, we have to keep it brief because we don't have much time left and we need to get around all of the parties to be fair.
The important thing is making sure we've got a trade deal that works for the UK and for Europe. We cooperate and make sure that we deliver the defence and security for Europe. And we have 140,000 workers, for example, in our NHS who are European. We've got to secure them and Brits living in Europe.
Labour is very clear that we want to maintain an incredibly strong partnership with Europe. We're very aware that the terms of that are going to be changing, but we cannot be going into this all bluster, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What we need to be looking at is workers' rights, environmental protections and security, as well as forming a really strong trading relationship.
David Curtin, UKIP.
Yeah, to the gentleman there, you're absolutely right. We do need to get out, and we do need to get out in a timely fashion. And what I do worry about Theresa May's speech, some of it was good, but she seemed to indicate that we might have transition arrangements in many areas for an unlimited and unspecified number of years. And people voted to come out. We want our fishing waters back. We want to control our borders. We want to come out of the single market, and we want to do it in as quick a time as possible.
Okay,
so we need to get on with it.
Quickest time as possible being the key thing. Brian Paddock, Liberal Democrats.
What we say is we don't know what the final deal is going to be. And who is it, once we know what the final deal is, who is it who should decide whether that is an acceptable deal or not? Should it be politicians or should it be you? And we think you should decide. We think that we should stay in the single market because that's going to be best for the economy, it's going to be best for jobs, and it's going to be big. If you want to go and move to Europe, if you want to go and work there, if you want to fall in love with somebody from the European Union, then you have got to have free movement, and that's what we stand for.
That's where we'll leave it. Kate Forbes, SNP.
So we respect across the UK that a majority voted to leave the EU, but in Scotland, 62% voted to remain. And so over the last year, Nicola Sturgeon put forward some compromise solutions for what in a way that would recognise the majority vote to leave, but also Scotland's position in voting to remain. All those proposals and discussions have been soundly rejected. And so we're now in a position of saying, well, once we know the deal, whenever that might be over the next 2 years, we will give people in Scotland the opportunity to choose between a hard Brexit that doesn't take into account Scotland's interests and independence in the EU.
Jonathan Bartley, the Green Party.
We want a ratification referendum. We will fight to maintain environmental rights, workers' rights, freedom of movement. I'm absolutely passionate about maintaining freedom of movement and the next generation having those benefits which I had in my generation. It's not fair to shortchange the next generation and take away those freedoms, those rights that we've enjoyed. You know, this generation is getting shortchanged enough as it is. It's getting saddled with private debt from the public sector. It's not getting the jobs that we want. It's not getting the opportunities. We should have a say for them in the final deal.
Clyde Cymru.
I think you say there's no such thing as a hard Brexit. Wales has 200,000 jobs connected to tariff-free trading with the single market, and we are net beneficiaries from the EU because in Wales we have some of the poorest areas in Europe when we're looking at GDP. So a good deal with the European Union is absolutely crucial for the people of Wales, and what Plaid Cymru want is a mandate from the people of Wales to go to Westminster to put Wales on the political agenda and make sure that our voice is heard in those negotiations.
Okay, let's get a few more closing thoughts on Brexit from you guys. Hello.
Hi, my name's Shakti. Brexit has a significant impact in terms of education. I want to know from the parties in terms of like how will they address that and support education, because obviously because of Brexit makes it more difficult to utilise resources internationally. Students considering PhDs of gaining funding from international institutes but still studying within the UK.
How do you feel about Brexit?
I'd just like to return to the point that Sarah Champion made, which is fantastic, about workers' rights. Going forward with negotiations about the Human Rights Bill, that's something that LGBT persons in our society look towards for the same rights to work, live and marry those that we love. Heading forward, I want it to be really important to both parties in whatever negotiations they do, that those rights must be affirmed and upheld in a society that is often changing.
Thank you very much, and let's get a few closing comments also from online. Nick.
Yes, Brexit is something that whoever's in charge come the end of the week will have to deal with almost straight away. But as we've seen tonight, there are lots of different views still. Here's a couple. James says, when will people realise this election is for the best Brexit, not for a future government? And then Richard, the 48% of us who voted to remain are being forgotten. The whole referendum was a mess. Now, I for one think tonight's debate has been quite well behaved, but Craig, with a parting thought for us, what about a new campaigning rule where you can't badmouth other parties? The insults are irrelevant. Back to you, Tina.
Thank you very much, Nick. So this has been Newsbeat with the final debate. A big thank you to our guests tonight and to all of the audience here in Manchester. If there is anything that you still want to get your head around in the last day before the election, then you should really do a search for BBC Reality Check. But from all of us here in Manchester, good night.
I've been getting away with it all